The songwriting is weak, I have to say. It's emotive and it's expressive, and when it hits, it really hits, but it is not profound or complex by any stretch of the imagination, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. Hello Swifties, welcome back to my channel. I am the Taylor Swiftologist, and today we are going to be talking about Olivia Rodrigo, the alleged heir apparent to the Taylor Swift empire. If you're new here, I'm a journalist by day and a Swiftie by choice, and in my free time, I like to devote my analytical and organizational skills to dissecting the public life of my favorite pop persona, Taylor Swift. So if you're new here, please subscribe and leave a like and a comment. Let me know what you think of the video. I'm always down and open to hear your ideas on what this channel could be and what kind of content I could be putting out, so would love to get your feedback down below. If you haven't already heard of it, my podcast, The Evolution of a Snake, is actually putting out an episode today dealing with this very topic. We're talking about Olivia Rodrigo and Taylor Swift and, the intricacies, the ins and outs of their relationships. There's a lot of psychoanalysis and there's a lot of, kind of salacious gossip going on in this episode. But I think that if you're at all interested in this topic, it would be very fun for you to check out the podcast and listen to a longer form conversation on this very topic. And I will leave all of that linked down below, but I will give you a little summary and a video companion to that content here today. I'm planning to diversify my content a little bit more in the coming months. You'll see some vlogs and some interesting other topical related things coming up soon. So I hope that you'll subscribe and stick around to see what I'm going to come up with for you. But today, like I said, we're going to be talking about Sour and Olivia Rodrigo and her lack of writing skill, I suppose, which is kind of the whole thesis of this video. I want to be very clear that I actually like Olivia Rodrigo a lot and I'm really rooting for her success, but I feel like the particular circumstances that her career has kind of emerged under and are subject to at this point in time are not helping her to achieve her full potential or giving her the space to kind of fully realize her artistic vision. And the biggest thing that's kind of impeding her from reaching that potential and experimenting and being kind of off the wall and finding that distinct Olivia Rodrigo-ness of it all is that she is constantly, incessantly compared to Taylor Swift. And this is just too high of a bar to clear for literally anyone. There is no next Taylor Swift. What happened to create Taylor is a kismet circumstance of luck, of context, and of skill and pure raw talent. And to be honest, I feel like, Olivia Rodrigo is not working with the same kind of set of raw materials that Taylor was when she came into the industry, though, arguably Olivia Rodrigo is at much more of an advantage, having this whole Disney machine behind her and a name brand recognition beyond just her music before she even debuted her first single, Driver's License. So we're gonna get into it today, and I will, make it clear to you through my opinion why I think Olivia Rodrigo is not the next Taylor Swift and how I think she should be marketed, branded, and directed into the future. So I guess we can start with the raw materials, okay? Sour. Now I guess this is kind of a controversial opinion because all I see are people fawning over this record all the time, but Sour is mid. It's mid. There are 3 excellent songs on this record: Deja Vu, Driver's License, and Good For You, and everything else is kind of your run-of-the-mill teenage girl crying song. And that is not to throw any disrespect on the category of teenage girl crying songs. I am a Taylor Swift stan. Obviously, I am very interested in and motivated by the complexity and the depth in this category. I don't think, however, that Olivia Rodrigo has the range to kind of do what Taylor Swift has done with her career in terms of making that sad girl, emotional girl, vulnerable girl brand very successful for her. So the album is literally less than 35 minutes long. That's not very encouraging for a debut effort. And, for comparison's sake, if we look at Taylor Swift's debut album, we know from the breadth of undiscovered and unreleased songs, that the demo tapes that never kind of came to be, we know that Taylor wrote at least 150 songs. What that says to me is that she was really sharpening and honing her skill. And Taylor's, her technical proficiency with guitar playing and singing was not super amazing at the beginning of her career. Her voice is definitely something she struggled to work on throughout her entire discography. But I would say that at the very beginning, the thing that kind of set her apart from her contemporaries and the most important skill that she knew she had to hone was her adeptness with writing. She was not going to become famous or successful based off of her voice or her image. It had to be that that she had a unique selling point, and that unique selling point, the thing she was really good at, was conveying true emotive stories in clever, fun ways, but delivering them through a commercial vehicle. So that's melodic pop songwriting. So Sour and Debut were kind of met with different receptions from the public. I mean, let's keep in mind that Debut came out over a decade ago, and in 2006 it was kind of fun to dunk on teenage girls, and it was kind of acceptable to write off any debut offering of music from a teenage girl as something that was inconsequential or not to be worried about or taken seriously. I don't think that Olivia's Sour suffered that same kind of criticism, which is a good thing. It shows that the culture has evolved beyond kind of a very misogynistic first standpoint. But I will say that I think that it has shifted too far in the other direction, where I feel that, you know, I read a couple of reviews for Sour, the New York Times and Pitchfork, and I felt that these were too generous and too broadly stating that she was the voice of her generation. It seemed that Olivia is offered a lot of grace on the critical side of things because of her youth. Whereas I don't actually think that's a good thing for her to be listening to or following, as the songwriting is weak. The songwriting is weak, I have to say. It's emotive and it's expressive, and when it hits, it really hits, but it is not profound or complex by any stretch of the imagination, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be, which kind of leads me neatly into, you know, the main problem with Olivia Rodrigo's career so far, in that she has inadvertently at first, but definitely on purpose later, as she realized that it was a good thing and popular thing to say, compared herself to Taylor Swift in order to kind of, you know, cinch some of her fan base and establish herself with a reference point in the pop lexicon. So she definitely bills herself as a songwriter, as a chronicler of the human condition, you know, talking about heartbreak and angst and pain and drama. First of all, Olivia is literally a Taylor disciple. She is a worshiper at the altar of Taylor Swift, which I totally understand. Me too, same. So are many of you that are watching this video, I'm sure. But I would say that that's kind of problem number one when it comes to the kind of songwriting that she was doing. It seems to me that a lot of Sour is very directly inspired or lifted from Taylor's career and Taylor's discography. Songs like One Step Forward, Three Steps Back, which literally interpolates New Year's Day, are kind of attempts to create something Swiftian-like, but where they miss and kind of fail is Olivia doesn't have that knack for the melodic songwriting that Taylor has. I think we forget that Taylor Swift is not only kind of preternaturally talented at writing, but she also is a genius at creating these like memorable hooks that stay in your brain forever and ever and ever. Olivia definitely has some of that, especially when she's inspired by other artists like Good For You, where she kind of drew inspiration from Paramore, Misery Business. That says to me that she has that kind of knack for commercialness in her brain somewhere. But what I'm not getting is the other part of Taylor Swift's skill that is pretty much impossible to mimic and copy, which is her adeptness and her fluency in understanding and conveying the human condition, which I think Olivia wants to do but is kind of unable to do because it's something you can't teach, and even if you practice, I think that you can't quite get it. Some people are born lyricists and poets and writers, and others aren't and have to work a little bit harder to get half as much material. I think Olivia probably falls into that second category, whereas Taylor falls into the first. Make no mistake, I think that Taylor definitely put in more work to her debut than Olivia did to hers. It felt rushed to me. You know, to only be able to come up with 11 songs at less than 35 minutes in length for its entirety is kind of shocking to me when this is your offering to the world, especially as a kind of blockbuster debut artist who's riding the coattails of 3 really great songs. So my suspicions are that she had Good For You, Deja Vu, and Driver's License ready to go, and she was kind of rushed into releasing something because of this rapid pace of, you know, TikTok consuming content and how everything has to be now. It doesn't really give artists, especially new artists, any time to develop emotionally or mature sonically before they can get thrust into a limelight that is so punishing and so harsh. I guarantee you that the more that Olivia's career goes on, the higher of a standard she's going to be held to, and I think that Driver's License set a very high bar. I think that was a great song, very Swiftian in its intent. Definitely set out what it intended to do, which was lay Olivia up as this kind of like center-left mainstream pop girl who, in my opinion, is definitely more of a direct descendant of the Billie Eilishes and the Halseys. Not so much of the Taylor, though she would like to think of herself as such, and many have tried to compare her to. And I guess we can get into the direct material and see like how, you know, there's a breadth of perspective on debut Taylor Swift's first album that doesn't really exist on Sour. Sour is kind of about like one specific heartbreak, and when I say specific, I mean it's not actually that specific. We get the impression that he breaks up with her and starts talking to someone else. That's pretty much all we know about this relationship. It is delivered to us ad nauseum. We get some brilliant details about Uptown Girl in Deja Vu and some more specific visuals of her driving around listlessly after getting her driver's license in the first single, kind of a more angsty rebellion and Good For You. But beyond that, there isn't a lot of character development or maturing or lessons learned or insight gleaned throughout Sour. It's very one note. A lot of the songs sound the same. Many of them are very straightforward and direct. Whereas on Taylor Swift's first album, Debut, we had songs like Mary's Song, Tied Together with a Smile, The Outside, Invisible. While this record was about heartbreak, it expanded its lens to look at the experience of being a teenage girl and having that kind of diaristic songwriting where you take into account how other things that you experience affect the way that you perceive your heartbreak. Songs like Mary's Song, for example, were really just kind of a sign of what was to come in the future, writing a whole complete random story, bringing it to fruition with absolutely no emotional personal connection to it, but still delivering an effective and emotive performance. I don't quite think that Olivia has the range, like with her pen, to be writing songs like that at this stage in her career. I think that she could probably churn out a few more Good For Yous and driver's licenses and deja vus, but I think that's quite a narrow box for her to be in, and I'm not convinced at this point that she has the range to step out of it and kind of attempt being the chronicler of the human condition that she has kind of laid herself up to be in comparison to Taylor Swift. Another difference between Taylor and Olivia is that I think that Taylor had a little bit more of a warm-up time than Olivia did before she was billed as this like major, huge pop star. The first 3 albums of her career were country albums, and that was a box that she had to very neatly like fit her way into. And you know, when you're in a box, you have to learn every single inch of the walls. You have to know every corner. You need to understand how you can fit and maneuver within every little thing that's within that set parameter that you're given. With country music specifically, it is more literary than other forms of music. It's very focused on narrative storytelling, whereas pop music is more about reaching generalities. The reason why Taylor's pop music works so well is because she comes from this narrative, oral history, songwriting tradition that I don't think Olivia is directly familiar with. And when you say that you're influenced by Taylor Swift, what you're saying is that you're influenced by the way that country music has informed her pop songwriting and made her kind of unlike anybody else. If you don't have that own direct experience with that country songwriting or a genre of similar kind of restricting constraints, I don't think that you can call yourself a Taylor Swift disciple or a descendant of Taylor Swift or the heir apparent. For an heir apparent to Taylor Swift to emerge, that person would need to come from the country songwriting tradition, in my opinion, because I really think that that is a foundational kind of hallmark inflection point in her career. Now, I'd like to be clear that I'm not really criticizing Olivia in this sense. She's a teenage girl and she's had all of these opportunities kind of thrown at her. If you were 18 years old and you were told, do you want to do an album and a tour right away? You would absolutely say yes. Of course she's gonna say yes. But I think that, you know, this is where good managers and having good people that care about like the proliferation of your art in the future, this is where they're supposed to step in and make sure that you're making good decisions and not doing short-term gratification and ignoring the long-term ramifications of the decisions that you make. If Olivia's handlers were really trying to lay her up to be the next Taylor Swift, what they should have done is let her percolate for a little bit more. Put out those 3 songs, maybe make it into an EP, and then let her have some time to experience more life and write more songs, and then come back with a fully formed debut album, including the songs from the EP later in the year. However, they were kind of in a rush, it seems, and now we have Olivia on tour, the Sour Tour. By my assessment, the Sour Tour is a little bit of a disaster. It looks extremely low budget, which is kind of incongruous with how they're trying to lay her up as the next blockbuster megastar Taylor Swift descendant. She also did not have any practice. I think it's important to remember contextually that Olivia's career as a songwriter kind of came about during the pandemic. She did not have a warm-up at all. For Taylor's first album, before she even went on her first headlining tour with the Fearless Tour, she had a whole era where she was opening for more established country music acts and trying out her live show under less pressurizing circumstances. Olivia's first experience of touring is a headlining tour. That is very overwhelming for someone who has 35 minutes of material. I also find that Olivia looks a little bit lost when she's on stage a lot of the time. She doesn't know how to like use her body in space. And Taylor had a similar problem because she was not a dancer and she was often playing the guitar, so she was even more limited in terms of her range of motion. But I feel like Taylor comes across to me when she's performing, even back then, as much more rehearsed. And I think that that's because she had more time to really develop her stage act and her presence and see what was resonating with the audience and maybe what wasn't working as well. I do notice that Olivia looks very small in the middle of a stage. She looks very lost and confused. She kind of flails about a little bit, drapes herself on the piano, but all in all, it seems like she just wasn't ready for this opportunity that was given to her. I really think it would have been cool for her to open for someone like Harry Styles or even for Billie Eilish, one of her contemporaries, just so that she could get her feet and understand what it meant to entertain a crowd at this scale for a long period of time, because she looks scared to death when she's performing on the Sour tour. Yeah, I don't think that's her fault at all. I think that's definitely the fault of her handlers. So another thing I kind of wanted to touch on with the Olivia and Taylor thing is that I think that, you know, the pressure on both sides for Taylor to acknowledge Olivia as her heir and Olivia to live up to these extremely unmanageable expectations is that it has caused some sort of strain or fracture on their relationship. I know a lot of people were saying, why didn't Taylor acknowledge Sour? Why isn't she doing more to, like, you know, ingratiate Olivia? I would like to, you know, take a second and be empathetic to Taylor's positionality in all of this. At the end of the day, we're looking at it as spectators. We want both of them to do well. We want both of them to succeed, but they are competitors. Olivia has set herself up accidentally by mentioning Taylor all the time and comparing herself to her, and, you know, her publicist does this too. They have, you know, the Olivia Rodrigo team has set herself up as a direct competitor to Taylor's bag. Like, they are literally competing for Taylor's audience, trying to get the Swifties to come and join the Livies and, you know, get in with her crowd and kind of share the spotlight a little bit. We know Taylor. We know that Taylor is, you know, a little competitive, a little vindictive. We know that Taylor is not going to go down without a fight, right? And what else we know is that, you know, during Miss Americana, Taylor has a lot of anxiety about aging out of her industry and of overstaying her welcome. And personally, I don't think she's quite ready to give up the pop game yet. I think she's got another big pop record left in her. And Olivia's emergence as the heir apparent is kind of an indirect signal that Taylor's reign as the queen of a very specific kind of diaristic and personal songwriting is over. And I don't necessarily think that that's true, and I don't think that Taylor is ready to give that up, even if it were the case that Olivia was so talented and ready to kind of fill the spot that Taylor has in the culture. Need I remind everybody of the song Nothing New from Red Taylor's version, where Taylor literally says that one day she'll meet a girl who has the blueprint that she wrote and she'll cry herself to sleep because it's the harbinger of good times gone by. I mean, hello, the material is there. We just need to open our eyes and look through it. So if you're wondering why Taylor isn't so over the moon and, you know, celebrating Olivia every 5 minutes of the day, it's because she's kind of indirectly a threat to her position. Another sore spot that I think is going to be difficult for Taylor to swallow is that Olivia, you know, in taking that blueprint from Taylor, has been able to negotiate things in her career that Taylor was never given the chance to. So I'm specifically talking about how David Geffen, who signed Taylor to her Universal deal, signed Olivia and also offered her full control of her masters from the get-go. That has got to hurt. I mean, we all know the struggle and the pain that it's been for Taylor trying to reclaim the work that she, you know, painstakingly put together with, you know, no help of the men who owned it and bought it from her. I think that Olivia having her masters right off the bat doesn't ingratiate herself to Taylor anymore. I mean, Taylor, yes, got to blaze the trail, but she's still kind of left in the dust wondering, like, when do I get the chance to own my work, and how can I feel fulfilled with owning my own catalog while you get to have yours from the get-go? They've both been dealt a different set of circumstances. I can kind of see how from Taylor's perspective, it might seem like Olivia has a leg up that Taylor didn't have at the beginning of her career. Another issue that I'm kind of seeing play out in real time is this issue of songwriting credits. So Olivia gave Taylor and Jack Antonoff credits on Deja Vu, which was very confusing to me because that song is not a sample of Cruel Summer, which is the song that, you know, it was allegedly inspired by. I think she just mentioned it one time in, like, maybe one interview that, you know, the screaming and shouting parts of Deja Vu were a little bit inspired by Cruel Summer, but it definitely wasn't, like, I think we can all agree that it isn't derivative. It's its own unique piece of work, I think, that stands by itself without Taylor's interference. I've been reading some of the gossip, so don't take this as, like, Bible. This is just my opinion and my, like, interpretation of what's been going on. It seems to me that, you know, Taylor's team had witnessed that Olivia's team had been going on and on and on about Taylor being their inspiration and citing specific songs, and then not necessarily getting the coin, like, not getting the recognition. It's like, okay, yeah, you're saying that I was inspired, but where are my credits and where's my cut from the publishing? That's where the situation kind of went awry. So 1 step forwards and 3 steps back literally takes an interpolation of New Year's Day, and that's, you know, that's a sample. Taylor has to sign off and clear that. The Deja Vu credits came retroactively. That song came out and was received by the public before it got the Taylor Swift writing credit. There are only 2 circumstances on Sour where Olivia gave credits to artists that were not directly involved in the writing process. The first one was Good For You with Hayley Williams and I think Taylor York, her songwriter from Paramore, for Misery Business. And Hayley posted very nonchalantly about it online, being like, that's so cool, our publishers are wild and out. I don't think that she particularly felt like she had a claim to Good For You. So I'll just do a direct quote. So Olivia said, "It was frustrating to see people discredit my creativity." And then her co-writer or her producer lets the mask slip a little bit further by saying, "It seems people become really funny about things when songs get really popular. So I think that Hayley Williams was pretty nonchalant about this, and given the whole Deja Vu fiasco where the credits were added after the song came out, I think that we can infer that there was some behind the scenes hubbub from Taylor's team to Olivia's team. Whether or not the directive came top down from Taylor Swift, and I think it did because it always does, it kind of allowed Taylor to, cause a little trouble without getting her hands dirty and let Olivia know indirectly that she wasn't gonna go down without a fight, and she wasn't just gonna have her dues, given out and not paid directly to her pocket. We kind of expanded on this in our podcast, The Evolution of a Snake, but Olivia's more direct influence I really would think is Avril Lavigne, because she has that kind of like bratty, darker, edgier side to her that Taylor never really had. Taylor has always been like a sunny, pretty princess who, though she wrote about like some pretty sad things every once in a while, generally her outlook on life was optimistic and positive. No matter how many times she got her heart broken, she kept turning the cheek and coming back to get slapped in the face again. She was fully and wholly committed to the kind of ups and downs that life has to offer. Olivia, to me, is a little darker. She's a little more Gen Z. She's got a grittier, kind of more pessimistic view on life, a more suspicious worldview, and that really does differ from Taylor, and I think indirectly affects the kind of songwriting she does, and also further cements my point that she is not the next Taylor Swift. She's a different vibe and a different side to her. So I think that her more direct reference should be Avril Lavigne. Avril Lavigne, for the young people who are not initiated, very much took up Olivia's place in the culture. She was kind of a cultural commentator, which is maybe a bit of a generous term to describe her, given that she wasn't an excellent lyricist, but Avril Lavigne had a very specific kind of like gritty, dirty, grungy vibe, while also remaining super commercially successful and popular and resonating with a bunch of teenage girls. It just wasn't necessarily about the songwriting and the lyricism and the art of that. It was more about the kind of delivery and the performance and the general aura of angst that just kind of oozed from her as she performed. And I think that Olivia has started to realize this because she has done a cover of Complicated on the Sour Tour, which is honestly fantastic. Go and watch it if you haven't seen it. But to me, it seems like if she was being smart, she would shift a little bit more into positioning herself as the next Avril Lavigne. And I think she is already doing this with like the schoolgirl skirts and the chunky boots and the excessive jewelry. I think that she's kind of on her way to making that her more overarching inspiration point. Yeah, I think that would give Olivia a little bit more latitude as well. It would allow her to write not just about heartbreak, because she's not very good at writing about heartbreak in a macro sense, like pulling back and looking at what heartbreak means as a sign about the human condition. She can really only view it from her own perspective. I think that the way that she can broaden her songwriting perspective actually would be to lean into this cultural commentator. We have two songs on Sour that are kind of premonitions of this. So we have Brutal and Jealousy, Jealousy. And I think that those songs really have seemed to have resonated with her generation of teenage girls. And it seems that she has the ability to project and deliver that kind of angst and discontent, grumbled worldview in a way that is super effective and compelling and true to who she is as a person. So if I were to say anything to Olivia Rodrigo and her team, it would be lean into the Avril stuff, lean into that kind of disaffected, grouchy teen perspective, but keep it commercial and keep it friendly so that you can still get your coin and eventually go on to create a body of work that is worth a headline tour. All right, so that's all I have for you today on the Olivia Rodrigo topic. If you want to hear more about what I think about this in depth, you can listen to my podcast, which I co-host with my friend Madeline. It's called The Evolution of a Snake, and I will leave that linked down below. And I will see you guys in my next video.